Morning Show. This is the Praise Life Morning Show, SPRLiveFM.com, Fun City Radio FM, and Success Radio. Last week, we had our guest in, Mystery FURTADO, an RN. She graduated from university in Belize in 2019. She's a proud single mother of two amazing boys, Kade and Kilim. I hope I'm pronouncing the names right. I always get stumbled over the names. Her passion to help others began at an early age of 8 when she was tasked with the responsibility to administer insulin to her diabetic grandmother. At the time, the family resided in a remote area of Belize, making it difficult to travel for treatment in a hospital. Due to this personal loss, having roots strongly planted in Belize, just being fortunate to be a Canadian, I feel that it's my duty to make a change. And today we have none other than Mystery with us again. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Well, as we dropped off last week, we were talking about our eating habits, and some of us during the pandemic time, we didn't recognize that we had issues, especially in the black community, especially among men. Men don't like going to doctors. And before you find out, it's too late. My dad was one of those people. He didn't like doctors and he didn't like taking medication. So when he found out that he had diabetes, it had already spiraled into kidney failure. What are some of the things that you would say are symptoms, especially for men, that there's a possibility that there might be something going wrong?
Well, when we're talking about diabetes, there are some key signs that men and women can look for. Especially like frequent urination, a lot of thirst. Sometimes you can feel pale or like you're sweaty or clammy. That can be a sign your blood sugar is low. If your blood sugar is high, you can have, blurred vision, feel jittery and nervous. And sometimes you'll have pain because diabetes also affects your nerves. So you can start to have little tingling in your hands and your feet. And more commonly in the black male is cause of non-traumatic amputations. So a lot of time, because again, culture sometimes in our community, being sick can be seen as a weakness. So the men are the providers, so they are seen as strong. So for them to be sick is hard, because that is how we raise our boys. And if you think about it, it starts from a very young age, and I'm not saying it's bad or good, but as women, we contribute to that idea that the men have to be very, very strong, right? So sometimes when you're raising boys, you say things like, are you a boy or a girl? Toughen up. Why are you crying? These are things that we subconsciously tell our kids. So as they get older, they also internalize that I have to be strong, I have to provide, I have to protect. So then they're less likely to go and seek medical help. And my advice to men over 35 and 40 is to try to develop that confidence to walk in and start off with a basic health examination, whether it's a blood test. Start small, start somewhere, because it's not our fault that we don't trust the healthcare system. But at the same time, if we don't do certain health checks, we may find out too late. By the time we find out, we may have other complications. And for me personally, in my organization, and even after reading research, I'm very passionate about encouraging the black male, to seek medical attention, because they have a higher rate of amputation than females. And it can be multifactorial, right? Sometimes, it might seem feminine to do a pedicure or check on your toes. But those simple things are what, in the long run, if you have diabetes, you might lose sensation in your toes, and you can end up having a cut, having it infected, and you not even knowing. And by the time you do go check on it, it can lead to you losing a toe, even losing an entire foot. So for me, I think more than the signs, we shouldn't wait for the signs. We need to be proactive and, develop that little bit of trust to try and walk in and say, hey, I think I want to do a health examination, because prevention is better than cure.
Well, I was one of those people who weren't too fond of doctors. And to be quite honest with you, I haven't actually been to my doctor in over 2 years. I mean, there was obvious reasons, right? COVID was in, so I didn't go to my doctor for 2 years, and I keep putting it off that I need to go see her. I need to go see her. I'll make the appointment when all this stuff is over. But in any event, I worked in hemodialysis unit for as a tech aide for 25 years. During that period of time, I've seen many a men who came in, and you'll hear their wives saying, "Oh, he took so long to go to the doctor. I can never get him going to the doctor." Now, because of him having diabetes, now he has kidney failure and other complications.
Yeah.
I remember one particular guy who we became very, very, very close, and that's because we had so many things, like I would say, in common. He was from Grenada, an older gentleman, and he was sharing a couple of things with me. He was a party goer, and he said I was wine, women, and dance. And he said I never had time to stop and check on my health until one day I think he passed out, and they recognized that not only was he diabetic, but his kidneys, he was losing them rapidly. Um, and over the period of time he was doing dialysis with us, I mean, he was at death's door on many occasions. I know he finally passed away, but he ended up losing the left foot, then the right, then
Yes.
fingers of the right arm from the right hand, and fingers from the left hand. Bit by bit, every time I go to see him, he was smaller and smaller in the bed. That made me become very conscious of the fact, you need to go see a doctor. You need to go just a regular checkup, just to see that you're okay. Especially knowing that your mom was diabetic and subsequently had a swollen heart from being diabetic, and she eventually died from a massive heart attack. My dad was pretty much the same thing. He had kidney failure too, based from being diabetic. So I went and I checked. I was fine. And to this day, I still like to think that I am too. Only the fact, as I told you last week, that I discovered that, my A1C seemed to be fine, but it's just the morning sugars that I seem to be a little bit out of whack. So I need to pay close attention to that. Now, for women, what is the difference in terms of a woman who is diabetic? And by the way, the question that apart from that, a woman who is diabetic, and since that they have discovered it, can they reverse this? Because so many people who spoke to me afterwards says, I was, but I've eaten properly, I started eating properly, and I started doing things differently, and I'm no longer in that level.
Men or women? I think we touched on this briefly last week,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The notion of the concept of reversal of diabetes is subjective to the individual. As a profession, as a nursing person, I am not able to say yes you can or yes you cannot, because first of all, it depends when and what state you're in when you find out that you're diabetic. So let's say you find it in your early onset. As I had mentioned before, I have met two persons in my lifetime that have reversed type 2 diabetes, right? Because type 1 is genetic.
Mm-hmm.
I have not met or have not read any research for type 1 diabetics who reversed it. But for type 2, I personally have met two persons, one male, one female, who are successful at it. Now, if you find it at an early stage and you're able to do a complete lifestyle modification and you're consistent, not motivated, you are consistent and driven to make conscious changes, yes, it is possible that you can take yourself off medication and control your blood sugar, because it goes back to what my mom always told me: your genes can load the gun, but your lifestyle will pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you find out and you have kidney failure, you're getting amputation, I am not sure, or I've not read enough research, or I've not met anyone that has been able to reverse it once it's starting to affect the kidneys or the eyes. It is not to say it's impossible, but at that point it is multifactorial, because then it depends on your age, it depends on your support system, it depends on how mentally strong you are to not fall into depression, because a lot of times it's not always just a diabetes. It might be you have no family support. It might be a male person giving up and no offense to the males, but research has shown that if a male gets sick, they are more likely to feel like it's over for them and not want to fight as much in comparison to women. And these can also be very skewed statistics because I've read stories of men who've overcome great illnesses as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it just shows that sometimes the male species, once they're sick, I've heard a lot of men, especially in the Black community, they say, "Oh, when this happens to me, just kill me." They make jokes like that very commonly. "Oh, it's fine, it's okay. So for me, those are a lot of factors we have to consider when considering reversing type 2, because I personally believe that we should engage in having these dialogues, having these conversations, getting the knowledge, creating more safe spaces so you feel safe to come in. Because my brother always told me, do not wait until a doctor tells you to stop doing it. A lot of times we wait for the doctor to tell us. It's not like we don't know, but we wait until the doctor and by the time the doctor tells us, it might be too late. So why wait for the doctor? Let's try to make those tiny modifications now that in a long term will help, will aid, will prevent or reduce the rate of diabetes in our community.
Wow. Well, indeed. uh, this is a thing that has been plaguing the Afrocentric nation for a long time,
Yes.
in terms of diabetes. And as you say, when I look into the African community, excuse me, I don't, especially in Africa, I don't see a lot of that there, as opposed to the Caribbean.
Yeah, more in the Caribbean, 100%. But when we speak about Africa, there is diabetes that is becoming more rampant.
Mm-hmm.
But because if we talk about depending on what region or tribe, you find that some places in Africa, or for the majority, they still have access to fresher produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them still live in farming communities. But for the rest who are still in the city, diabetes is still a concern. It just so happened that because I think our line of communication is not as, if you look at the Caribbean, in the Caribbean, we're somewhat in tune with health and world news across the Caribbean. Our news channels tend to interrelate. So even if I'm in Belize, I will still know what's happening in Guyana or Jamaica or Trinidad because our news broadcasts similar news. Right. When we speak of Africa, we don't have a local station that is, really transmitting some of the health issues there. Mm-hmm. I've been to Nigeria, and while there's other health issues such as like malaria or dengue or certain other diseases that they blacklist us with, there is also diabetes, hypertension, cancer. These diseases are common because we are genetically predisposed due to the influence. So you find that even in Africa, there's a high consumption of meat and lesser consumption of vegetables. I went to Nigeria, as I mentioned, and I was very concerned because the hotels never served me any vegetables. But when I went to the local market, it was there. But there's a lot of meat, a lot of meat, all kinds of tasty meats. And, it was amazing. But after a period of time, your body needs fruits and vegetables. Right. So it's also happening in Africa. It is an issue for them. But I'm not able to comment so much on their lifestyle. I can just comment what I saw as a visitor. Mm-hmm. But it is affecting them, and we all have to collectively talk about it and make those modifications because their foods are heavy in meat. As I mentioned, I was doing portion control trainings, and I had African women attend my seminar, and all their faces were like, "Are you kidding me? I'm going to have a meal without meat? I'm not doing this."
I know, because...
Mitch, are you okay? They were against it.
Yeah.
It was so funny. She's like, "What are you doing? No meat. This is unheard of." And believe you not, we cooked together. Mm-hmm. I asked the question, "How would you make this recipe different?" She actually went home and tried it. Okay, so change doesn't happen overnight. It is very hard to get a black male or a black woman to even buy into the concept of having a meal without meat, because it is so embedded into our DNA.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that meat is bad. It's just that we consume a lot of meat. And if we really reflect and study back into our ancestors, our African ancestors never had all these diseases. They didn't. They lived very long lives. But our life expectancy has begun to lower because of the lifestyle we're now living. All the fast food, all the canned foods, the influence of social media and the westernized foods. But if we really ask ourselves, or if we really dig deep and study, that's why I heavily push the Afro heritage food pyramid. Because as I mentioned, there's only few places in Africa that actually cultivated rice before slavery and westernization. Because slavery looked different in Africa than it did for the rest of us in the diaspora.
So
They were on corn, ground food. So I don't recall at this time off the top of my head, but there was very few places that actually made rice. The rest of Africa was focused on corn, cassava, plantain, yams. Those were our carbs.
yeah.
Rice was something particularly in the Caribbean and Central that was brought to us from China.
Oh.
And then we turn around and consume more rice.
Yeah.
We eat rice sometimes 3 times a day.
You're hitting me hard here, man. You're hitting me hard. I mean, I'm not a meat eater. I'm not a meat eater.
I don't want to hit anybody hard,
Yeah.
and I don't want to say rice is bad, because that is not what I'm saying, right? What I am saying is we need to reflect into how much rice we're eating. We need to understand why rice has become our main or staple dish. And knowledge is power. So if we understand why we've been eating this way, we're more likely to be receptive to the change.
So let me ask you
And
this
that is the
question.
reason why. Go ahead. Yeah,
Let
go
me
ahead.
ask you this question. Is brown rice okay?
Okay, so brown rice has more fiber in it than
right.
regular white rice.
Right.
But your body is not going to distinguish brown rice from white rice. It's just like people ask me, honey or sugar? Your body's not going to go, oh, she's having honey over sugar. Your body's going to process it as sugar. So it boils back to how much brown rice you're eating. So a lot of people ask me that question so they can go home and still eat rice 3 times a day, but it's brown rice. And that is counterproductive to what I'm saying. So if you want to have brown rice, kudos, because yes, brown rice has more fiber. It hasn't been bleached. We haven't taken out all the nutrients. But at the end of the day, if you're still eating rice 3-4 times a day, it's the same thing. The carbs convert to sugar. And as a matter of fact, rice, do not quote me, I have to confirm this, but rice takes, I believe, 48 hours to fully digest. That means going from your small intestine to your large intestine to fully getting it out via your colon. Like, it takes a very long time in your body. If it's not 48, it's 72. I think meat is 48 and rice is 72. I'm not sure. But rice and flour take between 48 and 72 hours for your body to fully process it. So imagine having a diet full of rice, full of flour. Like, I'm speaking for Belizeans. We have something called tortilla, fried jack, johnny cake, powder bun, and all those things we would have in a day. Fried jack in the morning with eggs, beans, tortilla, cheese. Like, we go all out for breakfast. And by dinner time, it's either tortilla again, fried jack, johnny cake, or rice, and then a heaping amount of rice. So a good example, I always tell people, think of your plate as a circle, right? You want to divide that plate into 3. So you're going to cut it half down the middle. Half of that plate should be vegetables.
Correct.
But in our culture, that half is rice. This entire half section is full of rice. You go to any Caribbean store, you get a lot of rice on one side. Then in the other, you're going to divide it in 2. So this little portion is meat and this little portion is vegetable. That's how we eat. But it needs to be reversed. The half of the plate should be as much greens and vegetables as possible. Then on the other half, you divide it in 2. That is where your protein and your carbs is supposed to go.
Right.
And do not tell me two pieces of lettuce and a cucumber is a salad. Because that's what we always justify. Oh, our plate had a salad. We're
Hmm.
referring to two little pieces of cucumber or a little piece of a tomato or something. That's not a salad. That is just some greens on your plate. We need to increase that. But if we're starting there, it's okay.
I have here. Someone says I've noticed my body responding to a lot better to whole foods, meaning boiled plantains and corn and sweet potatoes. It's an enjoyment for me. Now, to be quite honest with you, I have switched from white rice to brown rice, but I find myself, because I also we have a doctor that comes on every Monday with us, Dr. Debs from who's a naturopathic doctor from Jamaica, and she does speak about this kind of stuff, especially pertaining to every other thing, not just specifically diabetes. But I have changed where I now eat more ground provisions, as we call it, and more vegetables than I used to before. Um,
Yes.
but I still have the craving for the rice, so I switched to brown rice instead, uh, where I can use that sometimes. But let me ask you this question, because this is my habit. I could find myself doing things, keep moving, working, and forget to eat. How detrimental is that towards diabetes?
Very detrimental, not only for diabetes, for your overall health. But I want to circle back quickly to something you said about I still have the craving for
Mm-hmm.
rice. When it comes to that craving, the idea is not to necessarily quickly replace.
Mm-hmm.
Is to get your body to naturally have lesser craving for rice by eating the rice in smaller portions.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we feel a need to omit food groups, but that is what leads to cheating. If you suppress what you like, it makes the meal plan, it makes the modification harder to attain. And I want you to remember something. I've just been reading up on this. Your mind is very, very powerful. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are consuming, let's say you're trying to reduce the rice and you're switching to brown rice, just because you're not enjoying
Mm-hmm.
that meal is not going to be beneficial to you.
This
It
is
is a
true.
crazy analogy,
Yeah.
but it is a real thing that I'm trying to get more research on it because I came across one article and I've been following up on it. But your satisfied, like how you feel satisfied, your eyes,
Mm-hmm.
everything plays a role into the nutrients of that food.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're eating something that you do not like, your body is not going to process it as something necessarily good at that time.
Very
So it
true.
is very important that whatever we're eating, we also try to enjoy it because then your body is not going to, in your at least your brain cells will not be willing to absorb as readily because you don't like the food. So I do want to remind and tell everyone we're not trying to cut out. We're trying to reduce and make tiny changes so that after a period of time, your body will naturally not want that food in excess. Because if you suppress it, it will not work.
I I fully agree with you, because when I made the now I was always on the vegetarian side. Always, but my diet was a lot of rice still, but I never really did eat the meat and probably fish. But most of the times I could make a good vegetable. I love my chickpeas too, that I used to add in there as well. Before I let you go, I want you to tell us a little bit more about your organization, what it's doing in London. I noticed that you have a garden thing going on there. So if you can
Yeah.
take the next 3 minutes or so and tell us a little bit about your organization before we let you go, and how one
Thank
can
you.
get in
So,
contact with you if they need to,
okay,
especially from Ontario.
amazing. So we're right now based out of London,
Mm-hmm.
and our big upcoming project is our greenhouse. We received $20,000. We participated in something called the neighborhood decision making process. It is run by the City of London, and it allows local organizations to pitch ideas that will benefit their community at large. So we made a pitch for a greenhouse in the downtown area. So central of London is going to be at the Western Fair. The idea of this greenhouse came because last year we ran a community garden in collaboration with the London Food Bank. The community garden, we were given 4 rows, and those 4 rows were able to serve 10 families, 10 families of color. And we were also able to share our produce with over 30 families. The whole idea of growing your own food, increase access of quality produce for families within the BIPOC community. A lot of times, persons of color are associated with being marginalized and low income. So we have lesser access to fresh produce and affordable produce. It boils back down to family dynamics. If you have a home of 4 kids, the likelihood of you purchasing more vegetables might not be the case because they go bad faster.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're able to engage the whole family to be proactive in trying to plant their own produce, it then increases your access and your likelihood to cook it. Because if your daughter or your grandchild is out there planting and they bring home this squash, they bring home the okra, you're going to have to cook it.
Mm.
And you yourself, if you plant a tomato, an onion, a hot pepper, a cilantro, and you physically go put it in the soil, crack it, and put it in your pot, you're going to feel so proud over that meal. So we're not only trying to lower rates of diabetes, but we're trying to address food insecurity, because food insecurity is also linked with poor health, poor self-image, and poor mental health, which in the long run can also affect and increase your rate if you're a person of color to diabetes. So I want to bring fresh quality produce to the BPOC community that is affordable, that is free. It just requires you to come in, bring your hands, bring your families, and let's get to planting, because a greenhouse alone can produce a couple tons of food, and we need to have more cultural greens. So we will not only focus on vegetables found in Canada, but we will try to bring some Afrocentric vegetables like collard greens, okras, right? Things that we grew up eating.
Mm-hmm.
We can't readily plant the planting and stuff like that. But for now,
Mm-hmm.
we can focus on the greens that we can plant.
Right, right. Well, listen, we want to thank you so much for sharing with us and thank you for sharing about your organization. How can one get on to you if they need to have a further conversation with you?
So they can send us a message on our social media page. And on Facebook and Instagram, we're at Type Diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
They can also send me an email at info@diabetes-it.ca. So if you log on to our socials, our email is there. You can send me a message. You can log on to our website, www.diabetes.ca, and get in touch with me, ask questions. If you're ever in London, please stop by our greenhouse. We're just waiting for the snow to get off the ground, and we're gonna hit the ground running. So,
Well, I hope you keep in touch with me when the greenhouse starts because I will take a trip up to London again just to see the area and
of
so I can
course,
talk about it. So whenever you get things going, just you got my information. Just hit me up and let me know what's going on, and I'll definitely be there to check it out.
thank you.
Listen, man, we want to thank you once again for being with us again this morning. It's always a pleasure having you. And as things grow and things develop, and you want to send some more information our way, please feel free to do so.
I will do that. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to being back and having more discussions.
Definitely. I mean, this is wanted to believe it or not, our nation, our black nation's biggest problem right now when it comes to diabetes and hypertension as well. But diabetes is one
Yes.
of the silent things that we don't pay attention to, and I see it in a lot of our families. So definitely we'll have you back again. All right.
All right. Thank
Thank
you so much. Enjoy your day.
thank you so much too. God bless you.
Bye.
Bye bye. That's mystery